Welcome to Intelligent Artifice, the podcast that helps you become a 10x performance marketer. Intelligent Artifice explores the cutting edge of the intersection of AI, creatives, and performance marketing. Every week, we deconstruct the ad systems behind high-performing advertisers using our in-house semantic analysis system, BruteForce.ai, or we sit down with top operators redefining how advertising gets done in a generative AI world. Whether you're scaling user acquisition, leading a creative team, or building a creative engine with AI, this podcast is your unfair advantage. Intelligent Artifice is hosted by me, Shamant Rao, the founder and CEO of the boutique growth marketing agency Rocketship HQ. You can find out more about us at rocketshiphq.com. Our services are ideal for advertisers spending over $50,000 a month on paid social. Check out the podcast website, intelligentartifice.net, or our newsletter, intelligentartifice.kit.com. Our guest today is Romain Torres, co-founder at ArcAds.ai, a platform that generates performance marketing videos using AI actors. ArcAds was one of the earliest AI UGC platforms, but what is impressive is that Romain used agentic workflows to scale ArcAds dramatically to over 7 million in annual recurring revenue in just 12 months with a very small team. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Romain's journey, but more importantly, we're going to unpack his playbook and apply so you can learn and apply these agentic workflows in your own business. I'm excited to welcome Romain Torres to Intelligent Artifice. Romain, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shamant. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Romain, excited to have you also because we worked with your team for quite some time since I think fairly early days of ArcAds, from the relatively janky avatars to where we are now, where it's very photorealistic. It's kind of crazy.
We actually worked together. We even worked together before ArcAds. Remember, you were
That's exactly right. You were my client many years ago, well before ArcAds. Good memory. I had actually forgotten that exactly. And I think what I find fascinating about ArcAds is not just the business itself, the product itself is great, but also how you and your team run the business. Lean, it's extremely agent driven. It's very, very highly automated. And I think that's an aspect I find way more fascinating than the product itself. The product is great, don't get me wrong, and we use it, but I find your journey and how we have scaled to be just as fascinating. So let's start in the beginning. When you first started ArcAds, it's my understanding that the plan wasn't really to scale with AI agents. And at what point were you like, okay, we actually need to use AI agents and automation in order to scale?
Very good question. So the company was growing very fast at a pace that we didn't even imagine. It was basically a rocket ship. And when you are driving a rocket ship, you have to learn while doing it. And you don't have time to spend 6 weeks hiring for every single role. So it was rather like an obligation and a decision to build those AI agents. They also arrived in a new world. In 2024, 2025, stuff was possible that was not possible before. You couldn't automate customer support before 2024. So being in this industry, when you are inside the industry, you see every single new innovation. So we knew every new innovation with AI, and this made us faster to integrate them in the business, being an AI native startup.
And definitely helps when you are very plugged into AI. What I'm also fascinated by is that it is my understanding, you can correct me if not, it's my understanding that as a founder, you actually built a lot of these agents. You built these automation, you wrote a lot of the code that goes into these automations. How do you decide this is actually good use of founder or a CEO's time versus more traditional founder responsibilities like vision, strategy, building a team?
That's a very good question. I think I'm kind of a builder, so I have this love for building, and I have sometimes to fight against it to be back to being a founder, not a builder, and hiring the team. But in most of the cases, I just had so much urgency of taking action that I had to build the thing. So let me give you an example of our most successful use of AI internally is customer support. And the way we automated this was like really through an obligation, as I was mentioned, not something we anticipated. I was initially handling the customer support myself, and I was basically spending a lot of time answering messages in customer support. Then someone from the team just focused on that. So we had one person doing customer support full time. But at some point, we got a point of virality where an AI video created with our platform went super viral on social media. And then the number of requests in customer support 10x in like literally one day. And we started receiving like not dozens, but hundreds, even thousands of requests every day in the chat. And it was just not possible to hire a full team to manage that in one day, but we wanted to
Right.
handle this customer support. And we had the data from us handling the customer support. So basically I said, okay, let's use AI and build something that can handle at least 80% of the requests, which is now the case. And in the urgency, we had to just build it. But now we still have 1% only on the customer support side. We might have to grow this at some point, but it was basically in the urgency that we built the infrastructure for this.
I think that's fascinating because it was almost like you guys were forced to build because you guys were just growing so fast and just the normal method wouldn't have worked.
Exactly.
And that is so fascinating. And do you recollect what was the first agent you built? And was that the customer service thing or was there anything else that was the very first thing that you built?
That was probably one of the first ones. The second one I can remember about that had a lot of impact for us was about user growth. As a founder, my role is to grow the company. We are actually two co-founders, two co-CEOs at Arcad. My co-founder is in charge of building the product and I'm in charge of growing the product. And when you are in charge of a growth team for a startup, typically you'll have 3 to 5 channels you want to test and you want to double down on 1 or 2 that are driving the best results. And then the more the company grows, the more channels you'll use. And for us, very early on, one of the top channels was advertising, paid ads on Meta, which is a topic that you know very, very well and that you helped me understand, by the way, in the very beginning of our previous company. Advertising is all about creative testing. Basically, you can see Meta as a bucket where you will put as many creatives as possible. The more creatives you test, the more likely your ads are to perform. And it was a challenge for me being like a co-founder and having so many topics to handle to be able to produce lots of creatives. So I was like, how can I still use this channel, which I know is very efficient, but spend time growing the company? And how can I maximize the number of creatives that I produce? And I thought, okay, instead of spending time brainstorming ideas, which is the day-to-day of any creative strategist, they will spend their time looking at their competitor ads, trying to identify what they do, trying to replicate that. I will basically just run some agents that will automatically go to my competitors' pages and bring me the idea and even sometimes generate the ideas for me automatically. And that was one that had, with the customer support, that was probably the second one that had a big impact on the company. Now, instead of having to spend like multiple hours a week brainstorming ideas, I could just have AI think about ideas for me, give me the ideas, and sometimes generate them for me.
That is so fascinating. And that can be a huge time saver because getting ideas, customer creative research is not always good use of a founder's time. So I can imagine. What I also hear you say is you use this for creative research and quick production. Can you talk to me about what the agent did and how was it constructed? What was happening under the hood?
So the way this agent works is it will help you figure out the first step of creative production. So when you create ads, you can see this as a project. Step 1 is getting IDs. Step 2 is producing the IDs. Step 3 will be testing the IDs in the Facebook ads account. And the step 1 has multiple steps baked in it. But one of the very important steps is market research. And what marketers will do is typically, as they will spend time on Reddit, look at comments of people who are in their community who are looking for content or search creating content about the topic of the product. So our niche, for example, was advertising. So we're manually looking at subreddits where people post about advertising. Another way you do the research is looking at your competitor ads. So it's a very good way to research what's working because if your competitors are spending money on these ads, there is a chance that these ads are working and you can just do your own version of it. And all of these tasks are super manual. So it was in 2024 when we started doing these kind of agents. And at the time, LLMs became very good at copying stuff. Give them a very good input. An LLM can redo a similar output that is very similar, but that has your own verbiage and wording in it. So basically what the agent did was, I had multiple ones, but the main one was Facebook ads library competitors research. So Facebook has a public library where you can see all the ads of your competitors. It will basically go to the ads library, download all the recent ads of your competitors, use AI to transcribe them, and then feed this transcript to an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude and ask it to rephrase it to promote your own product and get you a script. And then you get your own script and then use this script to generate a video with a talking actor in our platform.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And And you're right, that can traditionally be very time and effort intensive. I can also speak to how challenging that can be because we've actually built an agent that does something very similar. Goes to the meta ads library, gets hundreds of ads, transcribes everything. What we've also done is use vision models to see what is in the content of that, which again, you can also do. So and if I might follow up, so if a competitor is running hundreds of ads, thousands of ads, you're getting all of those through your agent. How do you understand or decide which ones are actually performing well? Because there could be a lot of crappy ads in there and something might be running for 200 days, but it just got bad performance. So how did you decide, okay, we need to model these particular ads only out of everything that the agent's giving us?
So that's a very good question. You actually don't know because you don't have the data of the performance. And you have two approaches here. You can either try to guess, and we did some of that. We tried to guess by looking at the transcript, looking at ads that have similar transcript but happen multiple times, give it a score. And if the transcript happens 20 times, then you suppose that they use the same ad in 20 different versions. So probably working well for them. And AI can do that very well. So we try to do complex iterations like that. But you can also have another approach where you say, okay, I'll just feed everything to the machine and it will figure out what's working or not. Basically, we took the second approach. We started with the first one, but then we went to the second one. We still have some manual review before we take a script and transform it into an ad. But from everything I hear about Meta, I understand more volume is better. So instead of trying to guess and to find out what's going to be the best content, I'm going to push as many content as I can on the platform.
And with Meta, still gives spend to 90% of spend to one ad, maybe 70%. Most of the spend goes to one or two ads, the top 2 or 3 ads. So is the approach that you're going to put maybe 50 ads in a single ad set? If whatever gets the most spend is the winner, you're not trying to do a strict A/B test. Did I understand that correctly?
No, I exactly do that. I don't know if it's the right approach, but I've seen people spend enormous budgets with this approach. And I don't necessarily give every single creative a certain volume of budget for testing. I will let Meta decide for me. My understanding is like Meta is one of the most advanced tech companies in the world. Their role is to make your life easier to find out which creatives are driving the best results. They will figure out a way to find out what's the best result, the best ad with so many signals that they have the clicks, they have all the data. And I'll just do my work and do the creative side and I will let them figure out the rest.
I think that makes sense. And that also matches how we approach things for most part. And so with your approach, so you have this agent that's looking at competitor ads and you're like taking literally everything and you are putting that into Meta, you could technically make tens of thousands of ads. You have no constraints except maybe LLM costs for building the ad. So where do you stop? So do you say, I'm going to build 10,000 ads today? How do you decide where to stop?
Yes, I feel we shouldn't stop. Like the more you can do, the better. But at the end of the day, we have limited constraints in terms of budgets, obviously, but also people. Until very recently, I was handling the ads for Arcades myself. And that means as a founder, I have to do 20 different other things. So that might not be ideal. We recently hired someone who can do that now. And now it's going to be more of, you can like basically post everything. But what I was doing when I was managing it myself was cherry picking the one that I felt had the most potential. And that's probably not the right approach because you as a human don't know better than the algorithm. But I had some feelings from talking with customers, from looking at the previous ads that already did well on their account and seeing some similarities with something that already was performing well. So I already had some knowledge about what's performing well, and I was able to cherry pick things. But at the end of the day, I feel like you want to have as few human input as possible to maximize your results.
I think that makes so much sense. And yet you're right that sometimes you're like, look, I understand the customers, what's happening in their business, so I want to have at least some inputs. I certainly feel sometimes I have to want to give inputs then that way sometimes to the algorithms. Okay, so you started the big win. It seems like it was with paid marketing because that was how you're growing, because you're in charge of growing the company. And that was sort of the big win on the agents. What were some of the other agents or workflows you pursued? We talked about customer support. You talked about paid marketing. What were some of the others?
So one of the most common problematic startups have is lack of communication between product teams and marketing and sales teams. The sales and marketing teams are talking with customers every day. The product teams are in Figma, basically. They are designing the product. They are developing the product. And that was a big problem we had because my co-founder was was handling the product, thinking about the vision of what the product should look like, and managing the designers, the developers that we were working with. And I was doing sales and marketing. So I was talking to customers all day long. At some point, I had 15 calls per day with customers. I really wanted to understand them very deeply. But all of this knowledge was in my head, not in my co-founder's head. Obviously, he was coming to a lot of these calls, but he would never have the time to do as many calls as I was doing. And then I started thinking, okay, we have a note taker right now in the call. Every single time you do a call now, you have a note taker on. And I was using them for like sales and being better at follow-ups and stuff. At some point, I figured out, okay, this data that is in the calls is gold for my co-founder. And in the same way I told you, creative production for ads is about 3 steps, like finding the ideas, creating them, and then testing them. The product lifecycle is very similar. You have to first do your research. Step 1 is the research. Step 2 is building the product. And step 3 is like having the users testing it and like actually implement the features. And I was like living in step 1 because I was doing so many calls with our customers. So I figured, okay, I'm going to build an agent that will take all of the summaries being written by these AI note takers and transform them into product insights that I could share with the team. And I basically set up this agent that will take the transcript of every single of the calls I do, put them into a document, feed this document to AI, and then every single week, AI will do a quick report, basically a newsletter with the best insights I got from the calls with my prospects that I could then feed to the product team.
I think that's also very underappreciated how much you can use note takers to really exchange ideas across the team. And I think that can be so powerful. And I think at this point, it might also be a good idea to step back and say, what is an agent? Or I think we use the word often. And I asked that because I was having this conversation with a friend, and my friend was like, agent is basically Python code. You used to call it Python code or a script or a Zap. It's just another word for Zap or Python code, but using AI now. Would you agree with that? Or would you say an agent is something else altogether?
That's a very good point. I think what I'm calling agent is actually not an agent. By default, an agent is autonomous, something that can make decisions. What I'm talking about are mostly Zaps or workflows. And the reason I call them agents is because it's just such a buzzword. And again, my role is communicate about ARCADs. And when I make a post on LinkedIn on these new workflows I built, if I use the word like workflow, it's going to get very few impressions. If I use the word agent, it's going to blow up. So I'm guilty of that. Sorry about that. It's marketing. That's life. And for people who just discovered marketing, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. If you had to differentiate agents between workflows are programmatic, you basically write the steps that you want to happen and then they will happen. Agents make decisions and you don't set up all the steps of what's going to be happening and you just let AI figure out the steps. I mostly build workflows right now.
And I agree that workflow is a less sexy term compared to agent, but I also think it's a lot easier to build workflows after AI as compared to 2 years ago. Without AI, we wouldn't be building so many workflows so easily. I learned to code. I've used Python to basically build a bunch of agents. And 2 years ago, I was like struggling in Zapier. So I don't think we should dismiss the fact that workflow is not very sexy. And I would imagine
workflow without AI is basically like asking, I don't know, a dog to do something. You tell your dog, sit, and then you train them to do sit, and they will be able to sit. And there is one thing they can do very well without AI. But with AI, the part of the workflow can be like talking to a human. You can say, do this and that and this. I will give you a transcript of a Facebook ad, read it and rephrase it. So the step of the workflow is much more advanced because you include intelligence in your workflow.
100%. And sometimes I was, again, talking to my friend and I was like, I don't know how people wrote code 5 years ago. Because I feel like it's so complicated, even with an AI co-pilot. I can't imagine how people did it before that. So you're right. It's like telling a dog to sit. I'm sure there's a way to make the dog sit down. In 10% of the situations, the dog will actually sit down, but it's really hard. With AI, it's a lot easier to make the dog sit down. It's like talking to the human, like you said.
100%. And I think it's going to be more and more the cases. And people are going to ask in 5 years, how are people doing in 2025? Now I can just type what I want and I see it and it's actually functioning. And maybe in 1 year, actually. But
Yeah.
that's fascinating to me.
100%. And just speaking of automations and agents, were there any agents or workflows that actually were not successful in your implementation? Anything comes to mind as a big failure?
So every time you try without a precise idea of what you want to do to build a workflow, you will fail. And that's the thing. People, because I was so vocal about these AI workflows that we built, a lot of people came to me and asked me, hey, can you help us build AI agents? And the true thing is, of course, if you have a very specific process that you do manually repeatedly, then there is a very high chance that you can automate it, especially if you include some AI in it. But if you are trying to just do AI workflows for the purpose of doing them, it's probably going to fail. So I think that the biggest failure is like trying to build without a precise idea of what you are trying to do. Because as soon as you really understand what you are trying to do, then there is always a way to do it. There is always a way to do it. A recent one that was hard was we are trying to use Instagram views as a predictor of potential for a successful Facebook ad. So instead of only looking at Facebook ads libraries for inspiration, we want to look at Instagram Reels. And the problem with that is Instagram API doesn't let you scrape the views of Reels. And that's a bit limitation. So you have to actually scrape the content, which is against that policy. So you cannot do that. So it's very hard. So sometimes there can be some limitations because of basically the limitations of the APIs you are using. But in most cases, the main limitation is just you not understanding exactly what you want to build.
Definitely. And I think my experience has also been a lot of times when things have gone bad, it's just because I haven't had an idea and I haven't had a very clear idea. And something I've also started doing is document stuff, which is very easy with AI, because if you're building something, something's not working, you ask AI to take notes and you will have a record for the future. Then you can reference that in the future. That's something that's been something I've been doing quite a bit as well.
Do you mean you record your calls and use the notes of the call as documentation?
Not exactly. So if I'm in a IDE like Cursor or Windsurf and something goes really badly, either my next instruction is going to be, please document why this went badly so that we can make note of this for the future. Or even if something goes well, I'm actually building something right now on the Facebook API. And you probably know there's the Graph API, the Insights API. They're not very intuitive. If you ask the AI to write an API call with the Graph API, it's almost always wrong. So I have to ask AI to take notes and remember, here's how you get creative. Here's how you get performance data. Here's how you get like ad IDs. And because it has made that note from the past failure, I can actually tell it in the future. If it's about to fail, I'd say, okay, go look at the past note where you failed. Let's learn from that. And you could do it outside of coding too, right? You could just GPT or Claude to take a note and say, what did we learn from the above exercise? Please keep a note for the future. You could certainly do that. And something I'm also impressed by is, and I think you've talked about this publicly, is your revenue per employee is completely crazy. And can you talk about that? Was that intended or was this just a bypractice? Was that intended or was that a byproduct of using AI everywhere? And tell me about how AI impacts the rest of your team in making that possible and having such a high revenue per employee.
AI impacted us in two ways, actually. It impacted the trajectory of the company, so the pace at which the company grows would have been very hard to sustain before AI. Because with AI, adoption is much faster than with any other technology. If you think about the internet, for example, people adopted it super quickly. It was much slower for people to adopt it than AI. And the reason for that is at the time, the infrastructure for the internet to happen was much less propagated around the world. So people didn't have computer, people didn't have a phone, people who had it didn't necessarily know how to use it. They didn't have the modem, they didn't have the connection to the right providers, to the speed was really slow. So you had to build a lot of infrastructure for this to happen. Now with AI, the infrastructure is already there. So it's like if you had to, build a building, but you only had to build the last floor of the building because the building is already there. And that's one of the reasons why AI companies are growing so fast. We are growing super fast, but a lot of companies in a lot of different spaces are growing super fast. We mentioned AI customer support. Chatbase is a startup that was created recently where you can replace your customer support by an AI agent. It's growing super, super fast and the adoption is quick because companies already have access to, they already have a website, they already have customers, and they already even have a customer support team. So they already have the training data to build this customer support facing agent. So it was the same for us. People already were doing ads. They were already online. They already needed to create UGC ads. So when a platform to create UGC ads using AI got released, obviously they adopted it super fast. So that's the number one thing with AI. Adoption is super fast. So that's why we grow that quickly. And then at the same time, a second phenomenon was happening, which is you can do a lot of stuff with AI instead of hiring. So 10 years ago, when you had a new problem, your question was, okay, who will I hire to solve this problem? Now, the train of thought is, can I automate it? If yes, okay, let's build the workflow. And then if it's no, obviously I hire someone to do it. And those two phenomenons at the same time make it so you can grow very quickly because of AI and adoption. And at the same time, you can automate a lot of stuff. And the headcount grows slowly, slower than before, but the revenue grows faster. So at the end of the day, you just have a much better revenue per employee.
I think that makes so much sense. And we've certainly seen a lot of companies grow revenue massively with very, very small teams. And that's just the nature of how things are today. And that makes so much sense. You also talked about how you're a builder, you want to build stuff. So you've been driving a lot of the workflows and building of agents. How do you get the rest of your team to embrace an AI first culture? Because clearly not sustainable if you're the only one doing the building. I'm sure it's effective if they use it, even if you build it, but in what way are you having the entire team be more AI focused?
So I think as a founder, the way you act influences the way the company will behave. That's a very good way to create this culture of automating stuff by doing it yourself. If people see you doing it, they will tend towards doing it more, especially at our size, right? We are less than 10 people. It's easier to build this kind of culture. The second thing is we are an AI heavy company. So our product has AI baked in it. So by default, everyone who joins the company will hear about AI 20 times a week, even more than most people do, which I know everyone is talking about AI, but it's even more the case in our company. So they will have an AI approach to every single problem they have to solve. And they have such a better understanding of AI. Now, if your question is for more traditional companies, being in a more traditional company and like pushing people to adopt AI is probably a core priority. And that's something that probably requires actual training and bringing people on who master the topics. I'm a big believer in consultants. I consulted you, right? When I was like building and growing my first app. So with the same co-founder, we built an app before creating Arcades, a mobile app. And at the time it was a fitness app. It was heavily reliant on paid ads on Meta and TikTok. And I knew nothing about paid ads. So I started like finding experts like you who have been running ads for a long time and ask them questions. Basically, how do you do SCAD network? Like all these names that can be scary. How do you set up an NMP? Stuff like that. I just asked the question to people who knew this much better than I did.
That makes so much sense. And just staying on the topic of teams, given that AI is so new, what are some of the things you look for while hiring your team?
So for us, it's one thing mainly. Building a startup that is growing at the pace our startup is growing is not a normal thing, right? It's like basically, again, riding a rocket. You really need to have something different than most people. And the way we describe that for us is like doing the extra mile. Now, there are people you will tell them to do something, they will not do it. Those are the wrong people to work with, obviously. Other people, you will tell them to do something and they will do it. But there is a third kind of people where you will ask them to do something, they will do it, but they will also do something on top of that you didn't ask them to do. And at our stage, when you are a small team growing a startup at a super fast pace, those are the people you are looking for. And all the rest can be learned. If they have this mentality of doing the extra mile, they will learn everything. And that's the only like common pattern between everyone we hire.
And I think that's so critical because you need everyone to stretch. And in terms of AI knowledge and understanding, is there something specific you look for while hiring? Is there something specific you evaluate them for while hiring?
So naturally, we ended up hiring lots of people who have a good culture about AI because they came up on Arcades, they got interested in Arcades because they were interested in AI overall. But honestly, people will learn. Again, every single skill, every single topic can be learned if you have the right mindset. At our stage, we are just looking for people who will do this extra thing that will help us build faster than competitors. In our space, it's just a race. Everything is a race. You have all the competitors who have very similar approaches, who are working with the same fundamental models, who are working with the same technologies. The winner is going to be the person who runs the fastest. And that doesn't necessarily need having more people. Sometimes when you have too many people, the company can be bloated. And I've had so many founders tell me examples where they raise crazy numbers, sometimes $100 million. They hired 200 people in a year and they ended up being slower with 200 people than with 10. So it's not about hiring. Obviously, hiring is important and you need to have more people to do more things, but it's about having the right people most of all.
Certainly. And you're right. And I think that's so underappreciated. And it's also so hard to get right, if you will. Something that I also think about and I wonder, looking at AI first companies, is how do you think about sustainable differentiation in the long term? Because again, there are a lot of folks that are like, if you don't have a foundational model, it's hard to differentiate yourself. And I imagine you think about this, what if OpenAI's built a video model, Google's built a video model. So how do you think about differentiating yourselves when, you know, the big foundational company, the big labs are already building video models?
That's a great question. And if you look at all the AI companies that blew up recently, the main differentiation is speed. The only way to differentiate yourself in a world where there is a new AI model coming every week is speed. So let's think about ChatGPT. They were the fastest at generating an LLM that was good enough for people to consider it usable. They were the fastest ones to build an interface on top of it, which is ChatGPT. And now everyone uses ChatGPT. And I'm not even sure ChatGPT is the best model. Is ChatGPT better than Claude? I don't know, honestly. To be honest, I can't answer this question, but I don't care because I'm going to be using ChatGPT because now ChatGPT has all my data, my knowledge, and everything, knows everything about me. So if you are the first one in this world, people will then embed themselves into your platform, use your tool more and more. You will build all the integrations to like really be embedded into their workflow. You will build the brands. When people think about generating ads, they think about Arcad right away now because we were the first ones to position ourselves in this market and we'll partner with these models. We are not like a foundational model company. In some cases, we'll build our own custom models, but in most cases, we'll use Google model. We'll use Sora model. Sora has some limitations. Google has some limitations. You'll find all of them in one platform, and I'm pretty sure your team uses us for all the different use cases and models. You'll also find our own custom models, but it's a race, and to win in this market, you just need to be the fastest at building and creating your brand.
I think something else that stood out from what you said was you are still aggregating all the models. If I go to Google, I can't use Sora. If I go to Cloud, I can't use Veo, if you will. But if you are outside of the big labs, you can still aggregate a lot of those through APIs. And that is definitely a big advantage, I would think.
Because people, if you think about Nike, they will have a very specific need for an ad. And to create an ad for Nike, there are so many steps of validation, approval needed before the ad is ready. So there will probably need to have one of the advantages of Sora, one of the advantages of Veo3, one of the advantages of our custom models, but they don't want to have 20 subscriptions and 20 different models, and they don't want to learn 20 different platforms. They will just use one, invite all the team and use it heavily.
And that's also right, because the big models, they are general purpose versus yours is much more specific to ads. So if somebody wants to build an ad, they can say, I don't necessarily want to go figure out Sora or Veo. I can figure out Arcads and have Sora and Veo come in through that.
100%.
Excellent. Romain, I think this has been incredible. I certainly learned a ton. I've certainly followed and admired a lot of the work you guys have done, and it has been incredibly fascinating going behind the scenes. This is perhaps a good place for us to wrap up. But before we do that, could you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Arcads.ai or arcads.com. You can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, Romain Torres, and I'll be talking about everything related to using AI for ads creation or mobile apps. I love mobile apps, but also for e-com and all the people who are running performance marketing.
Wonderful. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. For now, thank you so much for being a guest on Intelligent Artifice.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. Excellent. That was
Great.
great.
Good.
That is great.
Awesome.
Excellent. Amazing.